It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Jose Suarez, founder and CEO of Impactiva. Jose founded Leather Exchange, a global marketplace for the world of leather and hides, in 1999. After selling Leather Exchange in 2003, he purchased the company's quality control division, which served as the foundation for the creation of Impactiva, a leader in the transformation of apparel and footwear production chains. So today, Jose is going to discuss with us how to achieve stability and self-reliability in the quality of your eDemand chain. We are also going to discuss how to transform your strategic factories in order to achieve continuous improvement and thus complete sustainability. I'm also going to add one other note before Jose starts his presentation. A PDF copy of today's presentation will be available for download. Actually, it is available now in the handout section of your control panel. We are also recording today's program, which will be emailed to you afterwards. So with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Jose and ask him to start the program.
Thank you very much, Susan, and thank you very much for everybody for attending. I hope in the next 30+ minutes to inspire everybody on the holy grail that we've been for 15 years at Impactiva to help transform our industry's production chain to be able to more successfully meet the requirements and generate value for our end consumers. So I'm first going to start with what we call the 6 E's, and it's the need for change. So the burning platform. Why do we need to help? And when I said holy grail, it's very few companies in our space are really owning, I say in quotes, their factories and helping to transform them, as, for example, Nike and Adidas have done for a very long time. So most other factories are not being pressed in any significant way, transformative way, by the retailers and brands. So first I'm going to explain what we call the 6 E's, which is the burning platform and the reason for getting involved and spending the time and energy to help transform in a significant way your production chain. So this is eDemand, equality, cost, speed, elevation, and waste. So we'll begin with the first one. This is the traditional supply chain. And as you can see, there's many steps, and maybe I've even left a few out there. And it's all about producing and pushing to inventory. And as leaders of our companies, our responsibility is ultimately to our shareholders and also to society, but to our shareholders is to get the maximum return on capital. And the push system that the industry has been working on for decades, if not 100+ years, is, well, let's forecast, produce to inventory, ship it, and hopefully it will sell. And 3, 4, 5 months later, we hope the purchase order has been completely sold. And this is in contrast to what an eDemand chain is, which is the consumer co-designs, then you do your product development, commercialization, and onward. And ultimately, if it's designed correctly, you ship directly to home and hopefully bypassing even distribution centers in the future. Some people are already doing it, shipping air freight directly from China. So in this case, as you can imagine, if you can ship the product directly to the consumer's home, and you talk about return on capital, well, if you have 30 or 60 days payment terms with your factories, and the product is produced and shipped directly to a consumer's home, you have infinite return on capital, because before you even have to pay the factory, you've already received the cash payment from the consumer. So, you know, what we're predicating is try to move more to a pull system, at least for part of your production base, versus the existing primarily push system. Then we talk about equality, and I don't know how many of you have ever seen this curve, but this is the curve that controls your quality. And this is what is used, and it's called consumer risk, and it's an operating characteristic curve. And if some of you know that we based the quality in our industry with the brand and retailers sending their quality control teams, especially more so in apparel where there's less QA in a lot of brands and retailers, more quality control at the end. And it's based on sample inspection, and it's called acceptance quality limits, and there's percentages that are defined. And we believe that this system is broken for one major reason. The statistics around these curves and inspection tables, and it's not known by a lot of people that aren't heavily involved in the day-to-day of the world of quality control, states that 10% of your orders, let's assume that you've defined your major defect percentage, AQL, at 2.5. 10% of your orders, which is this number here, and if you move over, the percentage of non-conforming products is 9%. So 10% of your orders could have major defects, which are the defects that consumers can detect and will reject and return, and especially in home delivery, it creates a lot of frustration and negative energy, and you could lose a customer for life. If on top of it, your minor AQL percentage is 4%, statistics tell you that another 12% of defects can arrive in 10% of your orders, so that a whopping 21% of defects can exist in 10% of your orders. And this is why we believe before, when you ship product to a shop, when you didn't ship to the home, it didn't matter, because if you have a slight defect, you just ask for another pair of shoes or another garment. But as e-commerce increases from 10, 15, 20%, this is very debilitating for brands and retailers, and it's important for you to understand what you're demanding from your factories and understand the statistics and probabilities around the world of AQL. So what we propose, and we'll discuss it later, is that the only way to fix this is to transform your production chain to a culture of zero defects. And this is where the industry, we believe, needs to go. So here we talk about cost, and Elon Musk says that he has a free ride on his next tourist spaceship, if you can figure out these symbols. But here we go. We believe that the world of country hopping has come to an end. And unfortunately, a lot of brands and retailers are still looking for the next nirvana of low cost. Before it was Bangladesh, it started at nothing, and today it's at $30 billion, and now Myanmar and Egypt or Ethiopia, etc. But we believe that because artisans are very well connected, an example of that is Bangladesh, where there's been violent strikes, and the unions just rejected the government's approval to go from 68 to 90 something in terms of minimum wage, but the union is asking for $180. So we believe, because they're connected, that the labor costs globally are rising, and that what we call low-cost countries, if you analyze their slope of labor costs, are growing much more faster and significantly than used to happen 10, 15, 20 years ago. And when you add the fact that most tier 2 material vendors in our industry are basically around China, a bit Vietnam, Taiwan, Korea, moving to the Bangladeshs and Myanmars, as we all know, creates a very complicated supply chain. And complicated supply chains means that you lose speed, and at the end, speed and the lack of speed ultimately affects your net margins, because the faster you can produce a product, obviously, the less lead time and the more intelligence you can get from the marketplace to produce the yellow t-shirt instead of the pink t-shirt. And then the other question is, you know, how are we going to replace the 200 plus billion that China produces? China is 35% of the apparel footwear market globally today. The next 8 countries add up to 35%. So what we ask is, country hopping really the solution? And we believe not, that game is over with. And because it's over with, and you do have increasing labor costs, it's about time we all get involved and start owning our production chain in terms of pushing the factories and the factory ownership and leadership to transform and develop continuous improvement programs. So when we come to speed, we all have heard the amazing story of Zara, and it's been going on for 25 years, and that they only sell 85% of their product at full price versus a lot of other companies are 70, 60, even 50%. And so we ask, when you look at your organization, what is stopping your organization? And speed is not only on manufacturing lead times, but also in making your product development more efficient. And even, you know, going to the Zara model, why are we still producing 2 collections per season, 4 per year, instead of 6, 8, 12, and 24, so that we can bring more varied product to our consumers and improve the experience when they walk into our retail stores or our websites. Next one is elevation. And here we have, we propose that it's about time that the industry start focusing on the artisans. We call the artisans the operators on the shop floor, because they truly are artisans. And unfortunately, the history of our industry is that we don't use their minds. We generally only use their arms and legs. And I ask all of you to inspire yourselves and think of what would it be like if you and your headquarter offices just sat down and were told by leadership what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and there was no real involvement in brainstorming and being part of continuous improvement in your organizations. Well, this is exactly what happens on the shop floor. And most of you have been in factories worldwide. I've walked into factories that it's so sad that it looks like people are prisoners, because you can tell from their faces. That's the first thing I do when I walk into a factory. Other factories you walk into and you see amazing smiles and energy, and people are talking to each other while they're doing their work. But I don't think I've seen any factories, in fact, few factories, where there's constant dialogue and people raising their hands or hitting and-on lights, which are the lights that Toyota first innovated with lean manufacturing many, many years ago, where you hit a button and a light goes off and people come rushing to help you because you have an issue. We're not there yet in our industry, except for a few top-end manufacturers. And we also propose that it's about time we focus on the education of millions and millions of our artisans. Because if we educate them, they will help us improve dramatically. because through education, we all know people get engaged and we activate them. Today, they are a totally dead resources. We're not using their minds. We're not using their creativity. They're the ones who know how the work is done, and they're the ones who should be leading in the change, so it should be bottom up and not top down. Then there is a type of waste, that I believe probably nobody has ever thought about. When we talk about waste and sustainability, we talk about being green and use less water and generate less waste within our factories, whether it's tier 1 or tier 2 and on downward. But here's another type of waste that we see, which is incredible, which is a number that we had trouble finding. If anybody has any information on the total number of artisans in our industry, I'd appreciate it. They can email me at jsuarez@impactiva.com. But this is a number that we found after some trouble. And if we assume that number, and based on simple productivity improvements that I'll show you some case studies later, we can eliminate 20, 30, 40, and with simple automation, 50%. There's probably an extra 20 million people in our industry. And if we think about the extra factories and lighting and resources required for, especially in areas like China that have housing around them, we have a sizable unnecessary carbon footprint in our industry because of the excess amount of people that we have in the industry. So here are some pictures. If we look at the using lean, L-E-A-N, manufacturing, I'll show you quickly the 7 wastes, the famous 7 wastes. And this was a factory we were in, apparel factory. And a lot of this, everywhere, we found a lot of product that was sitting around that was not used for days or weeks. It wasn't typical inventory, just work in process that was produced in excess and wasn't needed. The worst case of this in finished goods is when H&M declared a few months ago, I think everybody saw it in the press, that they had $4.5 billion of garments that they had no use for, that they were going to have to figure out how to dispose. That's the worst case I've ever heard of overproduction. Waiting, we all know when you go into any factory, the second thing I look at is how many people are sitting and waiting for product. This is another major waste. The third one is inefficient transport within the factory. And if you drew out what we call in the consulting world a spaghetti diagram, showing where product is moving from one floor to the other or within floors, you really have a spaghetti bowl. It's sometimes very hard to draw as a lean consultant. The fourth one is unnecessary processing. In this case, it's very simple. The woman on the right is having trouble untying the bundle and wasting a lot of time. Fifth one is excess inventory. Notorious in most factories in our industry, we produce hundreds of pieces at a time instead of 10, 5, or even in some cases you could produce 1 piece at a time. And this is hundreds of millions of dollars of capital in our industry. That's another waste that aren't required. If you go in there and you bring efficiency to the factory floor, you're literally giving hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of dollars, a blank check, that you can give back to the owner for all the working capital he can take out of the business. Excess motion. This gentleman's trying on the right, working a machine, and his workstation obviously is not organized. So, and finally, rejections at the end. When we send our brand and retailer final quality control and we reject lots, which happens even in the top athletic brands we work, It's incredible the percentage of lots that get rejected and have to go through rework, which is a total waste. So I'm going to give quickly 2 slides on different types of production chains oriented to the 6 E's that we just described. The first one is around your core product and being efficient. So it's used for commoditized products, lower costs. It's your weakest value proposition because it's hard to differentiate. And here the idea is you want to run your factories at the highest efficiency possible to attain that lower cost. And it's based on a make-to-forecast model, but you have such great data over the years that the forecasting is very accurate. The second one is what we call the Core Plus, which is your core styles, but with some renewal every season, the colors, the trims that are put on. You still focus on cost, but you also focus on reducing the short time of product development and the time from idea to market. And you do use a forecasting model, but with high forecasting accuracy. Otherwise, you end up with a lot of goods, unsold goods at the end of the season. And third and fourth, third one is Agile, which is what you should be designing. And when I'm talking about your production chains and types, what I'm saying is that for each product type, you should be thinking about what factories you're going to use and put into these 4 buckets that I'm explaining. And even within factories, you might have, for example, an Agile line, which requires a lot less people on the line. And what you're trying to do is have a very fast response to unpredictable demand. It's for exclusive and short life cycle products. That's why it's fashion. And here the issue is that you really have to work with the factory to reserve capacity because demand is unknown. So the relationship with these factories or the lines within a factory is completely different because at times they might sit idly. But if you don't have them and you don't sign up and have an agreement and literally paying for them to be idle or guarantee a total volume during the year, you won't be able to absorb the high peaks that occur with the unpredictable demand. And finally, the idea is you try to make materials and components, make them as standard as possible so that you can quickly change them to meet the unpredictable demand. And the fourth type of supply chain, which is the one that everybody's talking about, which is nearshoring, and in the future, it will be impacted by very expensive robots and automation that will, excuse me, this is for total customization. Product features have potentially unlimited number of combinations. The order comes directly from a website, and the factory workload is dependent on direct orders. And obviously, this requires a very fast production chain to be able to meet the needs, and configurability has to be the design of the factories. We've known of Under Armour, Adidas' Speed Factory in Germany, and Under Armour and footwear. They have one for Baltimore for this type of custom configured product. So if we take all of this into account, we end up with what are the relationships that we want in our production chains. And what we have concluded at Impactiva is that you really want to figure out who your strategic partners, and these are the factories that you're going to have long-term relationships. And when we talk about owning factories, owning, I mean in quotes, is these are the partners you have to figure out, and whether they produce efficient, fast, or agile, or custom configured production chains for you. These are the Pareto rule, the 20% of factories that give you 80% of the volume. It has to be a very close win-win symbiotic relationship. You have to agree upon profit sharing based on your value drivers, and each factory will have a different relationship with regard to cost, speed, and quality that you're trying to achieve. And you're looking for end-to-end continuous improvement, which is what we talk about ownership. The other two types of relationships are tactical and transactional. And we believe that, unfortunately, a lot, especially the retailers, are being slow to react, because the relationship, especially driven from the purchasing departments, is still very transactional, where we're trying to squeeze the factories for the last penny. And if you take into account the need for speed and quality because of e-consumers and home deliveries, you know, the transactional model is not the best way to relate to, especially your important factories. So now I'm going to focus on Impactiva solutions and what we believe should happen in general with your strategic partners. So what we have designed is what we call the 3S solution, and it's based on quality stability, quality self-reliability, and end-to-end sustainability. The first one is basically, how do we take your QA, QC teams and make them smart? The second one is, how do we take your factories and create accreditation programs where you're going to transform them and help them transform, into truly being partners and achieving self-reliability. And the third one is end-to-end sustainability. And by sustainability, we mean here continuous improvement and being able to sustain changes in improvement in cost, quality, and lead times. So when we talk about stability at Impactiva, with respect to quality, we have this seven-step solution. And with the digital quality app that we're going to be releasing in January, what we hope to help our clients is to use the information by digitizing quality to be able to reduce the footprint, the QA/QC footprint, in a smart way by putting the resources where you really need them. If you have a core factory that's producing product and has little issues, well, then why do we still, in some cases, do 100% inspection of all the orders? Why don't we just bring it down to 50, 30, 10%, and then use those resources in more complex products, the fashion products, or the technically complex products, where the factories might struggle and need the support of the brand and retailer. So the risk management and predictive analysis parts of this equation, in risk management, what we do at Impactiva is we analyze each style, each stock keeping unit, and determine the aesthetic look, fit, and functionality, the key points that determine the aesthetic look, fit, and functionality of each SKU at every season, with the idea that we sit down with the headquarters merchandisers and understand their concerns so that we can directly take those key points and have meetings on the factory floor. And it's amazing when you look at it this way, that only 10, 15, 20 maximum artisans on a 100, 250 person production line are really impacting the aesthetic look, fit, or functionality of the product. So how do you take from New York, Paris, LA, the ideas of a designer or a merchandiser and take it all the way down to the factory floor is by spending the time and understanding those key points and then having the meetings before production begins and educating the artisans on exactly what you're looking for. And then with predictive analysis, what we're doing, in risk management, it's not only a stock keeping unit, but understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each factory and even the strengths and weaknesses of your QA, QC team, so that then with all that information, you can figure out what's the best allocation with predictive analysis of each SKU to each factory and each of your QA, QC team members to each factory. And as you start gathering more data because you've digitized quality, then you can start using artificial intelligence tools to predict where you're going to have problems so that then you can focus on those problems before production begins and try to anticipate them so that we avoid quality down the road. Next is self-reliability. And this is all about assessing and accrediting your factories, and very few companies do this. And we won't get into the complexities of this KPI table, but the idea here is that you're literally, based on a set of KPIs, you are literally creating accreditation levels for your factories and incentivizing them, giving them some sort of carrot, whether it's guaranteeing capacity usage for 1, 2, or 3 years, or incremental profit sharing as they move along the accreditation level, is we believe it's very important, and we see very relationships with strategic partners at this level. If you don't sit and explain to people, and in this sense it's ownership and factory leadership, what you're expecting of them and how you want them to build and grow up and continuously improve, then it's very hard for them to have a guiding light of how that improvement is to occur. So we go in there with our consulting teams, and in the first quarter, we're finalizing what we call our shop floor live control system, where we teach people the world of quality management. Unfortunately, in our industry, defects are produced and they just go from one artisan to another until they're finally packed, and it's up to you and your QC teams to find them. The idea here is, how do we build a zero defect culture where every artisan in the future is going to have a tablet in front of them, and they're going to be responsible for controlling the quality of the person before them and the quality of the product and their process step before they hand it to the next step. So this is a way to transform with very short-term consulting and digitizing and providing tablets to every artisan, transforming the shop floor so that you get accountability and discipline from every single artisan instead of the broken AQL system that we mentioned before. And then there is very low-cost e-learning. We're developing an entire e-learning platform to provide education. For example, line supervisors have very little knowledge of root cause analysis, correction action plans. They've never seen a fishbone, which is where you think about all the possible reasons why a defect has occurred. They've never understood the 5 whys, which is another tool of asking 5 questions until you figure out what's your final reason for having quality problems. And then finally, if you start digitizing the information on the data on the shop floor and understanding even to the level of each individual, how much we're going to know how many defects are being produced by each individual at any point in time, whether it's every hour, day, week, or month. And how do you start using that information not only on an individual basis, but within a department, within a line against another line, and within factories against other factories in your ecosystem that are producing the same product. We find that most brands and retailers don't have a overall digital platform that gives us information across all their production chain. And what we're proposing is to digitize this so that everybody can sit back in their home offices and work based on escalation as product as results are being reflected, and work on escalations and alarms if factories aren't hitting the targets that you've agreed that they have to hit. And finally, sustainability, and then we'll have some case studies. We believe that achieving a strategic partnership with your factories is about helping them through the change management. We could send industrial engineers to go in and improve lead times, labor costs, make agile lines. But the issue is not the tools. You could take somebody who just graduated and they could go do line balancing or figure out the optimal layout of machines or a line. The problem is, how do you make that sustainable? And this is where we believe in what we call Impactiva's leadership change management system, where you have to help build behaviors that establish required habits, which create desired values, and ultimately you transform the culture of the factory. And very few companies are doing this. And the ultimate values that we're looking for is transparency, accountability, discipline, experiment, learn, and positive energy. I don't know if you all have heard of this joke, but there's 3 sets of data in our industry. One is the reality of the shop floor. One is what the middle management gives to the leadership of the factories. And the third one is what we're shown as brand and retailers. And the way we go about this change management is a lot of education with short face-to-face instructor-led courses. And out of each course, we derive what we call homework, where we literally hold the hand for weeks and months of the middle management, especially on the shop floor, and get them to do what they have to do. For example, when defects occur, you have to go do a root cause analysis. You have to do a corrective action plan. But even to the production manager, where we teach them how to do a Gemba walk, which means walk your factory floor. And every day we meet him or her at 8 in the morning, and we walk for 30 minutes, and we show them the information on the electronic or whiteboards, and we teach them how to use the data and the metrics to transform the factory and push for continuous improvement. Quick 4 success stories, and then we'll open it up to questions. This was a Hong Kong fashion house that produced evening wear, complicated dress wear. They hired us to perform QA/QC within 6 months. We reduced their claim rates from clients from 3 to 0.87%, resulting in more than $1 million of saving. And they had a high, because of the issues of the complexity of especially the dresses and tops, they were continuously having quality problems and having to ship a lot of their goods via freight, and we brought that down, saving them another $1 million. Second case study, 50 million pair of casual footwear brand and retailer, also hired to perform QA/QC. Our proprietary QA/QC process has about 12 steps, and we do many things that people don't do in the industry. I explained one of them, which is what we call the know your product, the key points of the aesthetic look and fit. Another one is the artisan meeting I described. Another one is the first 50 pair audits. When the first 50 pair comes out on the line, we group everybody from development, commercialization to production, and we analyze first 50 pairs or first 50 garments. and make sure that they are meeting the standards and requirements of the brand and retailer that we're working for. And these are some of the results. Internal factory rework and rejection within a year, 70% down. Freight expenses, 80 plus. Rework at destination, that means in the US and Europe, 80%, and chargebacks dramatically down also. Third success story. This is an Egyptian manufacturer that hired us to transform their factory, improve quality, and increase productivity. And here's some slides. This is pieces per person per hour. Basically, in a 10-week program, after 3 weeks of analyzing what we were going to do, we increased 14% of productivity. And many of our factories are like that. Literally, in several months, you can get 15, 12, 18, 20. We've done even up to 28, 30%. And going back, it's not only doing this, but it's doing this with the factory personnel, the leadership of the factory doing it. We're only there to coach them and assist them and hold their hand with the homeworks that I explained before. And this is how you get them to own the program, understand the need for continuous improvement, and even when we leave, they continue improving month to month, year to year. Another one is reduction of quality, 2-point-something% down to average of 0.6%. The fourth and final case study, a workwear manufacturer in Laos also hired us to do process optimization, lean transformation. And this shows you how quickly, once again, it can be done. Before baseline, 70%. After results, 22% improvement in efficiency. And in their second line, even more dramatic, 28.6% in a question of weeks. What's incredible is you call these companies, and because of our focus on change management and not the tools, because 70% of our energy is on the change management, you call them up, and month after month, they're still continuing to improve their factories with or without the involvement of Impactiva. So thank you very much, and Susan, we open it up to questions.
Wonderful, Jose. Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate your insights and for this dynamic presentation. We do have time for questions, and let me remind everybody on the call to please go ahead and use your question box on the control panel and type in what you would like to discuss. We do have several questions here teed up, so I am going to go ahead and the first one is, can you talk about the biggest challenges you're finding in transforming factories in our industry today?
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, it's extremely frustrating for us because we go in and sometimes do assessments requested by a brand or retailer, and we go do a PA assessment, and we come back and we put together whether it's a 3-month or 6-month program, and we define what we're going to do, but the lack of understanding of continuous improvement and the need to change by the factory ownership is very frustrating. We even calculate internal rate of returns, and we sometimes laugh because we come up with numbers like 14, 15, 17% per month. So like the paybacks are always less than 9 months, normally around 6 months on our fees. And when you get these internal rates of return that end up being 400 or 500% on an annualized basis, you wonder why factory owners don't understand it and are willing to try. So that, to me, is the biggest obstacle. How do we give them enough carrots? And sometimes it's positive or negative carrots to begin their journey to continuous improvement and transformation. That to me is the big puzzle, and the only way we see it is huge involvement by their brand and retailer to own their factories and request changes, just like Adidas and Nike did, started 10 years ago.
Great, thank you. We have another interesting question here, a couple in the wings. First, can you give us your sense of, does it make sense to spend time and energy with the factories in China to transform themselves given the higher labor costs and the duties that we are facing and a little bit of the unknown out there? How would you tackle that?
Yeah, I think the productivity curve in China is still how can I say it? There's still so much to be done. I'll give you an example. We have somebody called Bill Blay. He used to work at Caleres. He runs our process optimization consulting. And he closed down the last Caleres. Caleres is a major footwear brand, $2-point-something billion company. And he shut down the last Caleres factory in Canada in 2003. And it wasn't because of productivity, it was because the material supply chain had disappeared from the United States. So it took him a lot of time to get, the lead times were just killing him on getting materials into Canada, excuse me. And when he left, his factory with simple automation, no fancy robots, it was just very lean and very simple automation, was producing 2.5 pairs of shoes per operator per hour. Well, China today in the non-athletic is only about 0.3 or 0.4. So there's still 600% improvement possible. And if you look at athletic, it normally runs around 0.7 to 1. So there's just so much efficiency to be gained that no matter how quickly labor increases in China, that if you really work on owning your factories and pushing them for continuous improvement, the curve on your productivity improvement is going to be much faster than the curve on labor cost increases. So on a per unit basis, you will bring your per unit labor cost down in China if you start getting involved in owning your factories.
Great, thank you. We have a question here that's a multi-tiered question related to certification. What type of certification is involved with Impactiva certifying factories, and where is it recognized, and is it recognized around the world?
In terms of what is this related to the accreditation that I was talking about?
Yes, in your presentation. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is more about us helping a brand and retailer to define their buckets of accreditation, whatever you want to call it, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4 or basic. So this is not a global standard. This is just, economics and industrial engineering, and working with you, the brand and retailer, to figure out what your value drivers are, and then sitting down and defining what the program looks like and what the metrics and what your operating goals are going to be over the next 3 years, and then filling out those buckets, those accreditation buckets, and agreeing and bringing in your top strategic partners, talking to them, agreeing on those metrics, and then being very clear on the carrots that you're going to define. So these aren't like ISO certifications, etc. This is just internally between you and your factories agreeing upon a journey and a roadmap for continuous improvement, and very important, you defining the carrots. If you don't define the carrots up front, then it's very hard to get people moving. You have to clearly state what we call the what's in it for me with respect to the factory leadership. As they move through this journey, what are you guaranteing that you're going to give them in exchange for their effort and time and energy and resources in getting their, Impactiva co-brand retailer accreditation?
Thank you. We have time for one more question. Jose, you had referenced this a little bit earlier in the first question, but circling back to the brand factory relationship, can you touch on your thoughts on how a brand can best motivate a factory to transform themselves?
Yeah, this goes back to the carrots, right? And this is to me the key in starting this. You have to be able to figure out the carrots, and there's different types of carrots. One of them is agree upon reserving capacity. I'm going to take 2 or 3 of your lines, and you're guaranteed over the next year, or maybe even 2 years if you can make that commitment. Because if you're able to, for example, guarantee capacity or guarantee a certain volume, or guarantee, maybe if they're a bronze, you let them earn 25 cents a piece or a pair. But if you're a platinum, because you have dramatically reduced your cost, you're lean and efficient, and your quality is stellar, then we're going to allow you to make 75 cents a pair or piece. I think that's what is lacking in the industry. Nobody sits down and really thinks about their partnerships this way, so that it is very clear what you're going to give them. And to me, it's several factors. It's capacity, it's volume. What are the factory owners looking for? They're looking to reduce their risk. And how do they reduce their risk? You guarantee them so much volume, or you guarantee them so much use of their capacity over a certain period of time, or you guarantee them in exchange for transparency, because if they're going to set up a shop floor live control system with a tablet on each artisan workstation, and you're going to have view to that data all the way back in your headquarters in LA, New York, or London, then in exchange, what am I, the factory owner, going to get for that transparency? Because with that transparency, you're going to know how many people are working on the line. You're going to be able to calculate the cost down to the cent. So in exchange, you need to guarantee them that you're not going to work with them on a transactional basis, which is squeezing them for the last penny. You have to incentivize them that they're going to make more money, because they're going to become more lean. You're going to make more money, but you're also going to allow them to make more money. And I think that's what's missing in our transactional industry state of mind. And this is where our focus is on the company and trying to educate brand retailers to move to this thought process.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. This is going to conclude our webinar for today. I want to thank again Jose Suarez and Impactiva for their perspective, for their great insights, and today for sponsoring the conversation. So again, everyone, you will receive an email with a link to the presentation materials as well as the full recording. And we thank you for joining the webinar. Have a great week. Thank you again, everyone.